I like that you have traditional library sciences stuff on the
What
PDF
are
you sent over. Like nobody says information architecture anymore. Like nobody. So,
what a
well,
nerd.
how early did you get started?
99?
Wow.
That's early.
Yeah, I brought a prospect to an agency. They couldn't hire me. They didn't have enough projects, and I brought an e-com project to a small agency that a friend of mine started in 99. It was it was called My TV Shop, and somebody had the licenses to, like, merch from Friends, The X-Files, and a bunch 20 other TV shows, and so it was a shop where you could buy mugs with the Seinfeld logo on it. It was ugly, but it was e-com in 99.
That's super old school. So, hey, how was your Father's Day? This is your second Father's Day, right?
You're so good. That's like a true father, like, you remember the age of a person's children. That is a skill that I haven't yet acquired, but that's a beautiful skill. Yeah, my kid is 2 years old. It was my second Father's Day. I got a card. They don't, we it's the bum end of the stick being the father, not the, mother, but it was nice. We built some IKEA shelving.
That's
That's
amazing.
part of being a
You have
father as
a
well.
boy or a girl?
I have a boy named Max, because I figure boys are maximum in all, and then we have a daughter on the way. She's
Wow.
gonna be coming around the bend in about a month and a half.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wow.
I'm at the
That
beginning
went.
of it, and I know from listening to you guys, you're, sending kids off to school and crying in the parking lot and all that jazz.
You got time. You got time.
That's coming up quick. I didn't realize that you guys are due in a month. Congratulations. That's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah. Two
How
under
was it
two
having
for a
your,
minute.
what's that?
I'll have 2 under 2 for, like, a month, and then because they are actually both he was born a week in the same week that she will be born. So, for a minute, I'll have 2 under 2, and at 50 years old, so it's gonna be a wild ride.
Dude, you're 50? Whoa. Okay. Good for you. That's brave.
Younger.
Younger, but like I've known you, like I remember the very first time we ever met, which we'll get to that story. But what was it like having a Father's Day where you had somebody that could like run into your room, knew you were dad, like knew the theater of it all?
That is so good. Yeah, it's amazing, and I had never believed it. I was always, being a man, like, having fun while my friends were making children and being responsible, and so I never appreciated what it's like to see your kid's face burst into your room and how much better that is than any tequila you can ever drink.
That's awesome. I say being a father, it's like I feel like the Grinch, like my heart has grown like 3 times.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You just can't imagine it, right? It's a blessing for sure.
So
Go ahead.
go ahead, Marco.
I was just gonna say that, one of the benefits of being an older pop, is I'm a lot more calm and focused, and my mornings can be spent just staring at the kid and not feverishly wanting to get onto Slack and, like, responding to work stuff. So I think I have more ability to be totally into him directly rather than if I was 30. I don't know how I would have balanced time with him versus time towards my work responsibilities. So to me, this came at the right time so I could do all my growing and working and now kind of be a better dad, I think. That's what I'm telling myself, at least,
I think
given the
it's
fact I'll
awesome.
be
I think
68 when
it's
he
awesome.
exits high school.
I don't think you're wrong there. I think I had mine at 34 and 35, and I do think there's a level of immaturity even there. I know we all like go through life thinking we're grown up. Like at 17, you're a man. At 25, you realize you're an idiot, but you're a man now. And then at 32, you realize at 25 you were an idiot, but you're a man now. And then at 40, you were an idiot at 32. I don't think I really sort of felt comfortable in my own skin until my mid 40s.
Exactly
Which
right.
is, well, my son for Father's Day did maybe the boldest move you could have done. He found a mugshot of me from like Halloween 2008 and had it put on a mug and put shit happens on it and then hand wrote me a letter. So he gives me the letter without the mug. I cry. It's handwritten. he writes like he's a Alzheimer's patient. So I read this letter, and then he's like, "All right, you can now open the box." And I'm like, "He's 19." I'm like, "That might be the ballsiest thing you could have
So
possibly
good.
done." Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say it would have said mug shot on the mug, but that's not what it
He knows I had a unique upbringing right up until about 8 years ago. I was Marco. You saw me in my the first time we met was a story not worthy of sharing on the podcast. So
that was probably the first time I knew that they brought sprinklers to a table. I wasn't aware that that was even a thing.
yeah, yeah. And it was also the first time I realized to never rent a table at a place that has a stripper pole at every booth. That didn't go well for our booth participants, we'll say. But that's the first time I met Armstrong. I met you. I met Miles. You were at Brooks Brothers back then, right?
I was, yeah, yeah, and I dressed the part too. I always dress the part of wherever I work, and I was bow ties and three-piece suits. A real nerd.
Yeah.
I
You
like
I
now,
go
dude.
that.
all in.
You look so sharp. You were like the young Dos Equis guy.
Yes, I was accused of that all the time. What I forget the tagline, but whatever it was. Yeah, people would say that to me all the time.
And then you were the theory guy. I remember that
Yep.
too. That was I think the next time I actually ran
Was
into
that
you
like the
over.
most interesting guy in the world or whatever?
That's exactly it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I would get like people would say that to me just on the street.
I love that.
Whatever happened to that dude?
He's,
I only
I,
see him in memes now.
I don't know. He's no longer in the campaign. He's irrelevant.
He's aged out, maybe.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe
We all
talk
age
to him.
out. It'll be an AI head next week. So, Margot, I don't get to see you or talk to you a lot. So, I live through your Instagram, and I got to ask you questions. We'll get to work stuff. But,
Okay.
dude, you bought the house and literally narrated the renovation
Yeah.
in like a Boston accent. And you
Yeah. I did
created
that.
this like mid century masterpiece. I feel like you ripped out everything I loved in that place and redid it.
Yeah. I mean, I was growing up in the city, changing out. I mean, you know how to change a light bulb, and then like that's kind of your limit. And so, I mean, maybe not everybody who grew up in the city is as useless as I was, but changing out an actual light and like turning the breaker off and like pulling down the thing and pulling apart the wires, then putting in a new chandelier. That moment for a guy is like the first time you've done that, you feel like who is it? The guys from Good House. What is that Boston show on PBS? That's who I was like had in the back of my mind. This
This
old
old
house.
house.
Yeah. So what I love about them is they like slap wood. They just like walk around a house and like slap wood and be like, this old like this wood paneling like gotta go. And like they would just like slap things and like say things in a heavy Boston accent. So that was my inspiration. But to me, Boston is the accent of like getting shit done.
That's amazing. Dude, you ripped out everything. You ripped out the fireplace. You ripped out a wall. I mean, did you do all that work yourself? By the way, it came out stunning. It's like this mid-century, like modern mid-century, like Sinatra vibe, which I love. I mean that with the most respect. I love what you did with that. But did you do everything? Did you ever hire somebody?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people working behind the scenes. That's how television is made. No, I did a lot of the basic stuff, but like there was a new deck and I had a contract to do the deck.
Yeah,
But
well, that's amazing.
thank you.
So let's get into information architecture. So how did you get started in the biz? Because you're using words in that portfolio. So for anyone listening, Marco sent me a PDF of a portfolio that's rarely been seen for I think it was 2016 backwards. But
Yeah.
when did you using words in there that I appreciate? It's like true library sciences stuff. So how did you actually get into doing in for ID? I'm going to use acronyms. No, nobody knows. Like you were doing information architecture, information design. You were doing real usability studies. Like how did all of that start for you?
Yeah. And I guess, if you were to fast forward to where I am now, I would like to help the youth figure out a path to get to where I am now, right? So like from being a young designer who feels all those feelings of like being inadequate and not an important person in a company, you have all sorts of interests in having your voice heard. And maybe because you're a designer and not a finance guy or a marketer or even a merchandiser, when you work brand side, the design is very much just in the service of other people in the business. You are a helping hand more than a visionary or driving the business. And so the question becomes, how do you become irreplaceable? How do you become important? How do you become somebody that has a seat at the table? That was the struggles that I was facing as a 25-year-old who had strong opinions and also was curious. Like, if you're not curious, you're useless, I guess. Like, I just thought that I just wanted to learn more. Ecom was a new profession. So the things that you're describing that go outside of the realm of just being a designer was my ways of trying to show that what we were solving in design was based on larger challenges that the business was facing. So when I was asked to design a page that does X, I was like, all right, what are the other pages that are leading to this page? What, right? And what's the email look like that's leading to this page? And I would have to go and interview people in the office being like, all right, you want to sell more pink shirts? I worked at Ralph Lauren at that for a long time. What is this campaign called? Is there a hook to this campaign? Is there like a statement that's being said in the email that I should, react to on this site? Like, is it about the number of different pinks we have, or the fact that pink is only one of many other colors? Like, what is the story here? So I was trying to show that I was solving bigger business problems. And so IA, information architecture, was a way for me to map out the context of what I was doing in a larger way. And I think show that I was more thoughtful than just making a pretty page. And then one of the things that really changed my career was a young man named Matthew Kelleher. He came into my office. I always describe him as being short because I think I was like a creative director at the time, and he just kind of walks in, new guy, also full of brass, and he says that I'm doing everything wrong. And he's like, the pages you are designing are not uh, performing in the way that you think they are. And I said, who are you, and why do you say that? And he had Google Analytics behind him. He was the new analytics guy, and this was like 2006. And he showed me that all the buttons I had been placing around, like, he showed me what the interaction with those buttons are. He was like, all right, so I can look at a conversion at the very end of the funnel and then look at a button here on the homepage and see how many people clicked on that button on the homepage ended up converting. So I can tell you the value of that button. And that button on the homepage in the middle of your big graphic, there's almost no correlation between anybody clicking on that button and them actually buying. And so he would show me why. And I thought that the middle of the page was where all the action happened. He was like, no, the nav is where 80% of your traffic is always going, or 80% of all interactions with your site are always happening in the nav, not in the big creative stuff that you think is so attractive. So he like read me the riot act in a very friendly way because I was the creative director and he was just like the small analyst. But his method of pulling the kind of emperor has no clothes type of thing to a creative director at Ralph Lauren for digital was like turned me into a UXer. That's when I was like, all right, all right, what should I do? Like, let's talk about this. Let's partner up. Let's like do some usability testing. Let's figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it made me a lot smarter. So that's kind of why I started to do all that and why I started to be proud of that. Right. So I wasn't just proud of what I was designing, but I was proud of my incorporation of data into my decision making. And that's all back in like 2006, 2007. To me, I thought it would give me a seat in the boardroom because I was articulating the new world of UX and data informed design. Whether or not that ended up landing me there is another question, but that was the intention. Long answer.
Yeah. I love you sort of telling this story of being able to back up why you did what you did, right? Like the thought like I got involved in IA and ID because I had, I at some point had to pitch that stuff. Now you're brand side, I'm agency side. They weren't really all that different, but like I just loved the power of like when somebody asks a question, like literally I could talk for an hour on why this path or why this campaign and the mechanics behind it. But the visceral reaction of design was something that was always a struggle to get people to look past. So
Well,
that's
yeah, people have
interesting.
really strong ideas about something that's very subjective, and what's right or wrong is what is it for them to say whether or not the design is good or not? So you have to be able to show the metrics behind it.
There's always a
I like to think Amazon proved that ugly still wins, if you get enough people to visit it.
The number of times that a great design that I've made has been like chopped down because Amazon does it this way, so you should do it that way as well, has been way too many to mention.
Do you remember the Apple era? Remember when everybody wanted everything to be like Apple? That's amazing. So you spent pretty much, would you say 80% of your career was on the brand side, right?
Yeah,
Inside UX, inside running. Now, when you were at Theory, so you were at Ralph Lauren, were you there when Paul Zengel was there?
I was. Yeah,
So is that
yeah,
how you knew Adam Grove? And yeah, is that how you knew Adam Groves and those guys as well, was through Ralph Lauren?
yeah. I met a lot of guys there. Yeah.
Josh Crepon, was he there
Oh,
too at the
for
thing?
sure. Yeah, he's over
So
at, Steve Madden now,
he
crushing
is.
it.
Yeah, well, you got so I didn't realize you went that far back with all the OGs because
Nikki Baradelli, she left, went over to Tory Burch, then down to Florida for White House Black Market, and then I mean, yeah, she like blazed a path as well.
so after Ralph Lauren did you go to Brooks Brothers? Because I remember I met you at like an exchange, a Demandware exchange show at Brook Brothers because I think Adam was pitching you guys and Miles when Miles was at Diesel. How funny is it that Miles was in charge of something at Diesel?
I mean, he looked like somebody who would wear Diesel like jeans,
Yeah, yeah.
Diesel like sunglasses. That sounds mean.
No,
He has like a
it's not
bob.
mean. No,
Yeah,
it gets better. I saw him a few years later. I'm like, "You still wearing Diesels now that you don't work there?" He goes, "No, H&M is the same stuff, just cheaper."
I
But
wear like
He ran digital marketing for Diesel, if I remember right. But that was the first time. So the first time I met you and Miles and Armstrong and Adam that was actually the first time I met Adam as well, the same show.
yeah. So that was I went to Brooks Brothers because the opportunity to redefine that brand, especially with everything I'd learned at Ralph Lauren, was so exciting. It started in 1818. One of the Other than Levi's, it's the oldest American apparel brand. I think Levi's started about that time as well.
Did you say
Unfortunately,
1818?
1818. Yeah,
Wow.
like, there's so many stories about Brooks Brothers, like, that, Lincoln was inaugurated in a coat that Brooks Brothers made for him, like a top coat, and he also was shot in that same top coat, and the reason is that he only had 1 coat, because this was a time when presidents just had 1 top coat, or he also was a pretty frugal guy, but I just like that he just like, the guy had 1 coat. And it had as like all this embellishment that Brooks Brothers put inside for the
I never knew
inauguration. It was
that.
kind
That's
of like
amazing.
inside. Yeah.
Well, I think I saw that you had said that Brooks did like 36 of the first 42 presidents'
Yes.
wardrobes or so.
They
I'm
were all
paraphrasing, but
clothed.
pretty close.
Yeah. They all clothed them. Like JFK loved Brooks Brothers shirts. All of his like he had some specially designed shirts that are now part of their like the lapel, the collar that he liked is was a thing. Yeah. There's so many like. And wait, the army, like all the generals and a couple of like lines beneath them, all those suits were Brooks Brothers. It was like deeply embedded in American culture. The gold rush, this is when Brooks Brothers started, is when young men were running off to California, suits used to have to be sized and it would take you like a week to get a suit. But Brooks Brothers just did like 3 different sizes, like small, medium, large, and would put it on these tables in their shop. You'd have like just all large jackets, large pants, and then you would like grab those and get on a train to uh, California. So it was really early on in like sized suiting for men. Great brand, but it couldn't. The way that it was run at the time was really based on sales and discounts, and as a brand guy, that was, like, something I really struggled with, and they just chipped away at the core of that brand over the years, and all of the redesign in the world, even replatforming to Demandware couldn't save it.
Seems like they've
Makes me
lost
sad.
their kind of luxury appeal.
Yeah,
Like I see them at O'Hare Airport. I'm like, why is this in the airport?
yeah. That's a successful part of their business is the airport part,
Well,
which is
once you have a kiosk in the airport, minus the luxury brands and the internationals, you know you're on your way down. I remember when Brookstone basically shut everything down and just had the airport annexes. That's usually the last
yeah,
nail
marking
hanging on
down.
a branch. Yeah.
But the person who was like the Pied Piper who took me over to Brooks Brothers was Ken Seif.
I
And
know
it's Ken
Ken.
Seif. It was through him that I met you, Rich. You may not remember, but it was on the floor of probably that same conference where Ken. So my, and this is an important thing, I think, in the realm of your podcast. As a brand side guy, you flip your badge when you walk the floor
Totally.
of a conference, right? Like you don't want to get talked to. And you also might have this idea that because you're at the brand and you're on the buy side, that you're special. And Ken Seif walked the floor of NRF and all these and really spent time at the booths where he knew who had created something and then year over year checking in with them and how their product had developed. I remember Monotate was one of those that he was like keeping an eye on and it was kind of growing. I remember when it was a small booth and the booth kept getting bigger and Monotate became a pretty big thing. And now I don't know where Monotate is, but it was like his dedication to learning about all the third party vendors, if you want to call them that. It's all not a very nice term, but like all the SaaS vendors or what wasn't even that SaaS, the fact that, but anyway, so like that ecosystem of great product and the young people who were creating it. He was really passionate and in tune with it. That taught me a lot to not be a jackass and think too highly of myself.
No,
How long you right
forgot
now?
that's where we met. I mean, I remember Ken. I knew we had bumped into each other, obviously at different times, but Ken was he's a great guy. Like you said, friendly, but very engaged in what was coming next.
Totally. Yeah, he was at Blue something. He was he started a site where he believed that the merchandising should totally be driven by an algorithm and not by a merchant. That was one of the thesis of his kind of, we should leverage technology to make these decisions and recommendations instead of people. And he was saying that loudly in like 2010,
Was that Blue
which
Martini? No, maybe no. I don't think so.
No, to
it
looking.
was a retailer called not Blue Nile. It's Blue something. Anyway, maybe not even Blue.
How long were you at Brooks Brothers?
Maybe 3, 4 years.
Yeah,
I wanna
that's a
yeah,
good
I'd like
run.
to say 4, and then, like, I met the folks at Fluid, right? So, like, Isaac Newton, who is now
Yep,
runs Pattern, met him there. Jeffrey Domingos, I don't know if you know him.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him a little bit.
Eric Stabo. Yeah, those were, like, formative days.
Yeah, well, that was you guys on Sundays down by the Ghostbuster place, watching football and having brunches and stuff. I got invited to one time when I was in New York, so about 8 it was actually probably 8 years ago, but I don't even know how long Eric's been gone. Sabo's still upper West Coast up, there somewhere.
He's in Oregon with his ma. He's taking care of her.
Good
Bless
for him.
Sabo. Yeah.
So you get out of Brooks Brothers, and where was your launching pad there? Like I said, there was a get between Brooks Brothers and when I saw you running things at Theory, I
Yeah.
sort of lost track of you for a while.
Yeah, I was there. I was at a place called The Line, which for New Yorkers in fashion was a bit of a thing, at least as far as I am concerned. It was like there was a store called The Apartment by the Line, which you could only get to from an elevator that was very nondescript down on Green Street. You had to know this elevator, and it just had a gold plaque that said The Apartment. And you would go up the elevator and you'd be in this apartment where everything was for sale. It was, there's been a couple of store concepts that look like that, but this one was very successful and really high end. And it had multiple brands, like high end brands within it, but then they incubated brands. And then Khaite was one of the brands that came out of that, which was called The Line. So The Line had The Apartment by the Line and then had a website called The Line. So I worked there, which was great. It was a kind of startup-y luxury retail and, shop. And then from there went to Theory. And then again, spent about 3 years at Theory working under Andrew Rosen, who also, like Ken Seif, is a real character in retail. He owns part of Rag and Bone and Alice and Olivia, as well as Theory. So I
Did
think
you
I've like studied again under a lot of retail badasses, including Ralph himself.
So, did you stay a practitioner as you got into leadership on the brand side? Like when you were running, had your role at Theory and at the line, were you still doing creative work? Like, did you ever get away from it on the brand side of it? Or did you ever grow away from it but still want to get back? Or did you always stay in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was no longer doing any design by the time I was at the line, and that was great. No, I think Brooks Brothers too. I wasn't really putting pen to paper much anymore. But I think one thing that working in brands teaches you is that it's an orchestration of many different disciplines. And I think, back to what this podcast is all about, is this is an industry that has so many different disciplines in it. And that's kind of what we love about it. And you could probably say that about many disciplines. I don't want to get into that, but like e-commerce has merchants and brands and all that they stand for, but then also all these data scientists, like the guy who kind of scared me straight about, using data to inform my design decisions. And then you've got obviously technologists and then project managers who are trying to anyway, I mean, I'm not going to list all the disciplines, but one of the things I learned that I liked doing more than design was getting all the different people in a room and working on stuff together. So kind of the orchestration is the part I like. I think every discipline thinks that they're the most important one. I think every discipline can probably claim primacy in terms of like what really and a technologist could really, claim that. But I actually made a deck once that showed the statements that align to every different discipline and why they think that they're the most important person in the room. But a UX guy that I met many years ago, I asked him, what's the secret to like successful product design? And he said that nobody thinks that they're the most important part of the team. That is the secret to successful organizational design. And I agree with that totally. So I really like putting together teams, working in a kind of workshopy environment with people who are humble but excited, have strong opinions, strong points of view, but know how to bounce that off other people. That ultimately is what I'm better at than
So are you not doing, how do you, because you're an artist, right? You're, at the end of the day, you're an artist, whether you're replacing a lamp at the house or drawing, you were drawing for a while. I don't know if you just stopped posting it, but where's your how do you get that outlet though? Like I do leather work. That's my creative outlet and I cook, but how do you get that out? Cause that never goes away. Like I hated doing design work eventually, but I still needed to do something. So what's your outlet for creativity now?
well, decks. I love making a good deck.
Do you have a minimum and a maximum? Is it a 9 slider or a 13? Do you pick
I was I was
the
just
Nikolai Tesla numbers?
I was just reworking the intro deck for Domain, which is like 25 slides, but it's like the narrative arc. Like, what are you trying to say? Like, you're introducing Domain to a new prospect. What do you say first, second, third, fourth? How does it flow together? What is the impression that somebody gets after having been pitched to? How much talking is too much talking, which I might be a victim of, not a victim, so like, yeah, the story you tell through a presentation is something that's my, I guess, creative outlet. Pretty lame answer. I also recently, my son is into cars. I'm sure you both remember this phase. So I drew a racetrack for my son with all sorts of animals on it. So my creative outlet happens at
Oh,
random moments when I'm trying to entertain my boy.
I have to go back to the deck thing though. So I have a question on decks. So whenever somebody comes to you or shows you a deck, how hard is it to not ask that they send it to you and give it back to them tuned up?
I That's easy because I don't want to touch a deck that is too gross. So I will not offer to tune up a deck that's too far from how I like it. But I was late to this call because I was showing Shopify. Like I sometimes say that like case studies are my love language. Pretty lame statement, but Yeah, like how we talk about the work we do is something I find wonderful. And how you mix the creative part of it, the UX, all the different teams that went into making this perfect thing. Perfect, it's a website, but like, we were successful at the end of the deck. These are our metrics. But how do you infuse like the labor of different experts that went together, the business problems that started it? I think that that's so seminal to being a founder of an agency. Like you got to be able to tell that story to bring in a new client.
Well, I think a lot of people don't measure it, right? Like what you're saying, I think is very important. And you kind of started it back at analytics. I think people kind of forget, right? You can show pretty pictures and look at this, but you have nothing like, did you actually help increase revenue? Did you actually help increase conversion? Like people, I'm just like, I don't fucking care unless you can show me something, right? And isn't that what you want to tell in your story to a customer? We can
Yeah.
actually help your business, not just make pretty pictures. I know I'm being a little harsh, but
We know that
No,
when you put a button up, you sound real sweet and soft and Midwestern and all of that. So I think, Marco, you made an interesting comment. Like websites aren't perfect. They're just there are perfect moments. There are not
right.
perfect endings, right?
No.
And everything drifts immediately. I think storytelling is probably the most underthought, underutilized, underfocused area of any agency staff member, because I think you got to be a good storyteller
Mm,
even if you're a developer, right? And I think that's an area that doesn't get enough of the limelight, quite frankly. I think I would consider myself a good storyteller, and that was why I felt I was successful when I had a good story and it was on point and it flowed. But it's easy to do as founders, and I have a design background, because you have all that information. One of the things I learned was it's really hard for other people to take that inference that we have just embedded in us and tell the same stories. I had a staff member that I was always trying to get him to do it like I did it. I was like, dude, I'm kind of successful, like you should do it. And he told me one day, he goes, can I be honest with you? I go, yeah. He goes, I'm not you. And
mhm.
I don't talk like you, and I can't talk like you, and I write better than you. You write in incomplete sentences, missing lots of important words, but you get by somehow. I don't know how. I forget what his exact wordings is. And he said to me, he goes, "Would you mind if I do my version of you, though?" Like, and it was the first time anyone was really honest about it, and at that point, I was like blown away that this kid had the balls to say that, but also sort of had to accept that people don't tell stories like we tell, Marco. It's actually it's a very difficult skill. Have you been successful in mentoring people on the right way to tell those stories?
I don't know that I've tried, so I guess the answer is no. Um, yeah, I think that storytelling is, you could say, a kind of core characteristic. If you want to be successful, you have to like tell a good story to a potential private equity company that might be acquiring your business. You have to be engaging to your clients, you have to be engaging to your staff. So storytelling is probably a superpower, but I do think other people have other superpowers that I'm probably not highlighting, that I'm not aware of. Jenna Posner, you mentioned her on another podcast, but she, like, what is your superpower? And yeah, for me, I think it has been about storytelling and being engaging. This little bit that I'm rambling at right now doesn't feel very engaging, but I remember in college, I was in a fraternity for about a minute. I thought it was something that it really wasn't, so I left it. It was essentially a room full of dudes to drink with, which I thought was great. But then there's all sorts of other stuff that I did not understand. And one of the things that they taught the guys was storytelling, like tell a good story. And if you could not, they would throw beer cans at you. They were literally, part of being in the house was teaching guys how to not be boring.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that. And I'd like to go to college. I don't know if they'll accept a 55-year-old freshman. I've threatened my son that I might be a freshman next year where he goes to school. He's like, Dad, she's like, Shannon, please tell him no,
Yeah.
like go to some other school.
you pay enough
Well, there's
money,
a
I'm sure they
movie.
take you. It's expensive.
I think I'm good. I feel like I'm smart enough. The stuff I need to learn, they don't teach in school. School is so far behind reality right now. It's going to be interesting what the next few years are.
Totally.
So, Margo, you decide to go from like being on the career on the brand side, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like I
Yeah.
find out like you're starting an agency, which tomorrow, prior to Domain tomorrow, but you had another for a minute. You had another agency, right, with Joe and a
Olivia.
couple other folks.
Yeah. Yeah, we did something that I've heard that other people tried to do, and that was to create a digital version of a consultant. And the premise was that into an interface you could type, as if you were a brand, the revenue you make. You type in your URL, and we'd use built with in the background to scrape your site. You'd type in some of your initiatives over the years, like an initiative for the year going ahead. And I think with like 12 seconds worth of information, which was like 5 fields, we would then give you back a dashboard of articles you should read, events you should go to, and then also the most important part, vendors you should look at. And so by scraping your site, we made a architecture diagram of your backend stack, and we're able to identify where you have some duplicity in the offerings from those vendors, and you might want to, choose between them. Obviously, part of optimizing your tech stack is removing all of the duplications of features and functionalities. And so, yes, we had a beautiful tech architecture diagram that separated all of your vendors that we scraped off of Built With and put them into various categories, and be used like a recommendation engine where we could like recommend, oh, if you have an initiative to like go international and you have XYZ like payment vendor, well, you're going to need to update that because, the payment vendor you have right now isn't going to, take Deutschmarks or whatever it is. This is where
Hold on.
this is where my tech efficiency falls apart. But like we were able to like, associate various initiatives with your tech stack and make various like recommendations. Rich likes it. Look at that. And he's
I
like,
did.
"Hmm."
So hold on. So your first foray was to be a product company?
Yes, yeah, it did not work out. One thing that was great about it was that it allowed me to meet and work with Joe and Olivia. They were at Born. So what happened is I was at Theory, and I was allowed to consult 1 day of the week. I was allowed to work 4 days a week, and Andrew Rosen liked the fact that I was in e-commerce and didn't want me to be full-time at Theory because that would take me out of having my fingers in a bunch of other pies. And he thought that that was an advantage to having a VP of e-com who was a little bit of a, kind of running around doing other projects on the side. So he's like, just be with us for 4 days a week. I ultimately would work for him 5 days a week because I just loved being in the weeds and didn't really have that. I mean, I was paid well enough to not have to do side work. VP of ecom at a brand side is a cushy gig. Well, it's not easy, but it's paid well. And then and this is just a testament to anybody working brand side, as you get higher up, there's a lot, and this is true for everywhere, but there's a lot of politics involved. And so if you're there for 2.5, 3 years, you start to see some trend lines and where your career may end up. And so it was at that point that I was like, oh, I only have to be here 4 days a week. Let me take this extra day and see if I can do something interesting that might lead to something more interesting. And that's when I consulted for Theory. I worked on their content strategy, like what kind of to tell the story of how Born infuses content and commerce in some sort of gorgeous way, and gorgeous. And I came up with, some slides that told that story well. And in so doing, so that was for, I forget his name, Eric Gutowski was the main. Do you know Eric Gutowski? He headed up Born for a minute. So yeah, it was through working with at Born as a consultant. I also hired Born to redesign our checkout. Rich, you will have remembered the one-page checkout days. I mean, Tom, you do too. So this was
Thing.
a one-page out design that we liked from Goop. Goop had a great one page with those 3 columns. Remember those?
Yep.
It was like a one page with 3 columns. Then on mobile, all those columns would stack. I mean, this was the hottest commodity in e-com back in
Yep.
2015, 16.
The
You're
trends
shaking your
we
head
the
because you like
trends we now
remember it so
regret.
well. Huh? Anyway, so yeah, so I actually had the wireframes and design for it, but Born was at that point a leading SI for Salesforce implementation. So I hired Born and dealt with Joe and Olivia. They were my technologist, and like head of account management was Joe. And then similarly, I was working with them on this content strategy presentation, and that's when we met. And then we all decided to quit our jobs and start Cogent, which was that thing I was talking about before that never got off the ground. It was like decent. It kind of worked all right. It wasn't
So
well designed. I designed it.
how did you go from a product that just, didn't hit to becoming
Yeah.
an agency? Like, did you start as an agency at Cogent, or did you guys just pull the ripcord and just go tomorrow?
We made websites in the background to feed our families. We had all quit our jobs. I went from making a nice chunk of change to nothing, and we made a couple of Shopify websites in the background to put soup on the table. And that's when,
That's the genesis of tomorrow?
yes, absolutely. We also, not to poke fun at myself too much, but we recognized that Shopify was doing things a lot faster and more cheaply than Salesforce. So one of my frustrations at Theory was that Andrew Rosen was asking me to do things and always sending me links to Shopify sites that were doing cool stuff. And I would then go to my engineering team and ask, I'd like to do this kind of thing. And I would be too low on the list of priorities. The amount of time that they had to support was too minimal. And so I just felt like I was a jackass at these board meetings being asked to do things quickly and in a design style that the Salesforce platform with our current resources was unable to achieve. So I wanted to do more customer facing cool shit faster. And so that's why we started playing around with Shopify in the background so that we could kind of test the metal of that platform. And it turns out that it was, yeah, cheaper, faster.
So how did like a side hustle of, because I did some Shopify stuff, done it a few times. It's fun. I like I actually love the platform, but how did like a side hustle because you needed some income turn into tomorrow? Because you guys, I mean, when you guys hit the scene, it was unique. You had a unique offering. I mean, you have all this brand side shit. So having never been on the agency, I can't even imagine like, oh, all the gaps that you saw and time to market and
Well,
time
that
to
was exactly
value.
it. Well, when you have two-thirds of your co-founding team coming from Born and being as intelligent as Joe and Olivia were, like they knew the blueprint for what it means to make an agency right out of the gate, not like bobbling and like go in this direction and then go in this direction or like glomming on services that you as founders can't fulfill, like, over promising and under delivering. Like like how our contracts were written, what kind of work we agreed to do and what kind of work we said, you know what, we could do that, but it's too risky and it might not work out. And we don't want to have that sort of reputation for like trying things out that don't like all those decisions were baked in correctly because my two co-founding partners came from like great agency expertise. On my side, I could ask Bombas, my friend Randy Goldberg, who's one of the founders, I could say, can we do some work on your site? And he said, yes. So one of our first case studies was on Bombas, and I was able to tap the network of friends of mine who are at great brands to do work for them on Shopify. So it was a really good marriage between their familiarity with what it means, not familiarity, but like their expertise with what it means to build an agency from scratch and my network. And what really made us successful was an enterprise methodology as a small agency. Documentation, process, rigor, stage gates, all those, terms that, big process requires. Having different levels of leadership on your team that meets different layers of client stakeholders. So you have like an executive VP layer, like a kind of account management and project management layer, and you have like a kind of the doer layer, and explicitly having different sorts of communications for those different tiers is also a very grown up thing to do. And establishing all that stuff really early on. So we came to Shopify acting like an enterprise agency and treated the platform like it was an enterprise platform, even though at 2018 it was a little hairy. But with Olivia's prowess and the people we brought on board, we were able to do high complexity on a platform that I, at that point, didn't know itself could perform at that scale.
Did you feel like you had to, coming from the brand side and creative leadership and your background, did you feel like you had to like step up a little bit or like catch up a little bit, not having agency exposure, or was your superpower the brand side that nobody understands in an agency model? Because I haven't been on the brand side, so I don't know if you felt like maybe your pace was a lot off and you had to kind of sort of box jump to get to the level they were, or if you kind of brought a perspective that didn't and doesn't exist in the agency market. Like
Yeah,
that's
it was
very.
much more the latter. Like, I mean, first with like high-powered co-founders and myself being really hungry to get back to the like literally hungry to get back to the revenue. Like my paycheck was so low. Like to get back to what my expectations were requires a lot of work. So, we started the company. I was already an old man. I was already, 40 or something, 45, 40. I was like 45. So I had just like a kind of it was, you know, hard to go back to ramen. It wasn't that bad, but anyway. So it wasn't the pace of work wasn't a challenge for me. I was surprised that people would not respond to my emails, because you have this network and some of them bite and say, yes, you can redesign a site for me. But when we would like do various things like, and I would send it out to and Joe and Olivia would laugh. They're like, you're no longer like people don't answer emails from agency folks. Like get used to it. And
You're
I was not.
selling
I
now.
was
Yeah,
not.
you're selling now. It's different.
Oh, and we always would laugh about that. Um, no, it was the last thing you said, TJ, is that being on prospect calls and talking to a client about known challenges that they have and saying that we are building our team to fit into their org. You always use that line that we want to be an extension of your team. We had this thing called the one model where we're like embedded within your team, all that shtickery that you're familiar with. But that it really is about, beyond the shtick. And I know Joe always hated when I would call it a shtick, but it was really about knowing the day-to-day challenges that those folks have and building an agency that really kind of fills the gaps that they need.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
You
would
almost
add,
have to
like
be. Go ahead.
the thing that you don't agencies may not recognize is that the folks you're talking to are so busy doing other shit. Like they have KPIs that they need to answer to. They're like literally trying to drive the business day in, day out. And they're getting emails like, and so like you need to just function and not have problems associated to your like execution of the work. There's like no bandwidth from a guy on a brand side to manage missteps by the agency. So that gets my goat. When we fail in any way, I'm just like, my expectation from a brand side is that like you guys rock. This is what you do. You develop, you engineer, you get it up live. It's not buggy. Like friggin' go. Like I don't want to have to stress about this because I'm stressed enough with these other things. So I think that having those really high expectations, having been brand side, elevated the quality of work on the agency side because there was no room to be shitty.
Yeah. Well, you almost have to. We found you had to meet them where they were and be one less worry in their day. And the problem was everyone had different worries and everyone was at a different level. So I always appreciated people that could go in and talk with the tech team or the IT team or the marketing team or the ecom team or the board, right? That's a special skill. So on that topic of like you being brand side and having the Born partnership, sorry, the Joe and is
Yeah.
Olivia, is that
Yep.
correct? Did you have you been bringing brand side folks over as sort of an advocacy or a layer? Like, how have you used that to your sort of advantages on the agency side in the early days of tomorrow? Like, did you bring brand people over and like indoctrinate them into like, all right, we're on the other side. No one's going to answer your phone calls or emails anymore. However, like we need you, to still act like a
No,
brand liaison.
I didn't do that because the salary that we were offering at that time, especially early days, was not something that would be attracted to anybody from the brand side. So that was not
Yeah, yeah.
a non-starter. But Half Helix, who we ended up merging with, and that's a whole story. So we merged, TLDR, like we got big enough to be interesting to outside money. Outside money said, "You're still pretty small. What should we do?" And one of the ideas was merge with your biggest rival. And that was a phenomenal and crazy idea. And I don't know how often that happens in business, but we saw Half Helix out there in deals, and they were a competitor. And to join forces with them, and by doing so immediately become the largest Shopify agency in the world overnight, was also a fantastic opportunity. And where I'm going with that is that one of their superpowers was that they hired Shopify people. And we are now like 12% people from Shopify.
And what
But
is
we're
what
not
is
as
the
brand
value
heavy
of
as I'd
that?
like us to be, but we're Shopify heavy. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
What's the value of that, having Shopify? Are they tech people or are they customer service? Like what
They're like
sort of roles?
sales, account management, PM. They're people who know the platform. And the benefit is that on the one hand, Shopify, it's a very familiar place for them because they continue to work on the very same platform that they know so well. The rhythm and innovation, kind of pace of innovation and expectations from like a youthfulness background. Like it's like young, clever kids who are familiar with the meteoric rise of Shopify find a familiar home at Domain because it's another side of the coin, but not that far away because we only work on that platform.
Yeah. It's a
And that
good.
signals to Shopify also something interesting because the people who leave on good terms and then continue to have a good rapport with the people over at the platform. And it's pretty symbiotic. Yeah.
Well, it's a good, I think, a lot of people don't, it's a good career move too, right? It's a set of muscles and reflexes and skills that, most people don't get a chance to get. You don't usually see product people jump to the agency side. It's just not, it doesn't happen. Just like you don't really see a lot of agency people jump to the brand side. But so sort of stepping back a little bit. So when did tomorrow officially start? Like when was tomorrow's like inauguration date? You guys must have that in your head.
I think it was December of 2018.
Okay. And then you guys, for anyone who's not familiar with Marco and Domaine, but then you guys took some private equity in and ended up becoming Domain. So how long were you guys on your own before you guys decided? And I want to talk about the PE thing too, but how
Yeah.
long were you tomorrow before you did the PE event?
Oh, like 4.5, 5 years.
So you guys were pretty mature. Did PE come looking for you, or did you guys go looking for a way to accelerate growth? How did that all kind of come about?
The former, there was a lot of interest in the Shopify space, and there still is from PE. And we were taking a lot of emails, and it's at one point engaged a banker to be our advisor in navigating all of the incoming interest.
Yeah, it's fucking a lot of paperwork and a lot of weirdness, isn't it? It's like overwhelming.
There's so many things about that, and I want towards the end of this, back quarter to ask you guys questions about like leadership and management and scale and growth, because that's it's one thing to start an agency and find success, but then it's another thing to manage through the private equity phase. And my first part of it before we selected our partner there was that I was in a world that I was totally unfamiliar with, being a creative, and I was being told things and expected to know things that I didn't. And that made me feel funny because I had had so much success in growing this business, but I was almost back to square one, to being this designer who needs to prove themselves and answer the questions that are coming from the worldview of somebody who values things that are totally different than what I value. And it was just so wild. They don't train private equity to talk to creative founders. Not that they need to. You got to be big boy and just manage through it. But it was definitely an area where I was expected to understand what EBITDA was, and straight up did not get it. So I had to do
How long
some good.
how long did it take you how long did it take you guys to switch over to EBITDA reporting? Because we went through that same shit show. We were like cash basis. We were like, I don't
Yeah,
even know.
and
I think
you
for I didn't know what EBITDA stood for literally 27 of my 30 years.
totally. Well, the answer is that there's a CFO we have who does the EBITDA reporting, and I don't freaking touch it. So, in many ways, throughout my career, knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at continues to be the case here. But yeah, so the initial foray into assessing various offers and even just starting the conversations about what how people value us. That's what was weird is I was being valued like for dollars and cents and even just like what is the market going to think about you and being told to like augment or change how we represented who we are based on the acquirer and what they were looking for. And my position was a little bit like, does the acquirer really know to value and what they should be looking for? Like how much of this is us educating them because they don't know about Shopify. They might not know about the kind of services we provide.
Correct.
Like you as an advisor in the finance space are telling me that the deck should do this because you know what sells, but I also want to exhibit to somebody that we're selling to a unique point of view that we have. I ended up not making that big a deal out of that, but that was like because at the end of the day these people do know how to sell you based on the terms that the people want to buy you at, but that was an initially weird dynamic that you have to kind of get through as a non-finance bro person.
How many people did you guys look at? How many PE folks did you have to talk to? Because that we
About
did I don't
15.
remember if it was 9 or 12, but
Yeah.
like it was fucking exhausting.
Yeah. We had 12 management presentations. I think we ended up having 15 offers.
How did you like quickly, and then I want to get into Q&A, but how did you decide who you wanted to go with? Because this we could do a whole other
Well,
podcast
Yeah,
of just
maybe
talking
we
about
should. Yeah.
this whole process. Because it was a for me, it was a fucking masterclass in like, boy, I wish I could do this. I'd look forward to the opportunity of advising somebody that's going to go through this in the future because it's different. But how did you pick? Like, what
yeah.
made you pick BV of all
Yeah.
people?
Well, one thing they tell you going into it is that if you want to sell to a strategic, there's a good chance you're going to sell to private equity. And if you're thinking that you want to sell to private equity, you're going to end up selling to a strategic. That was like a piece of advice. Kind of these bros all have nifty little pieces of advice, and that was it. That like whatever you're thinking, it's probably going to be the opposite. And so we were thinking that we'd sell to a strategic, and I was loving like Dentsu. I was like, oh, it's big, it's juicy. Of course, there would be, we would have been sold for scraps by this point if we went to Dentsu. However, if Dentsu's listening, really interested in, having further conversations. But yeah, so we were thinking strategic, went private equity. And the reason why we chose who we chose is they had done so much research about Shopify and they had a thesis and they had a point of view that was really well informed. And a lot of these other acquirers were just didn't put in the legwork that BV did. And I was just super the guys that came to us who we now have spent like a year and a half, 2 years just in the weeds with, just super expert, thoughtful, proficient, like easygoing. They wear
Yeah, you
vests,
got
but not from Boston, but
yeah, yeah.
I can't recommend them highly enough.
You should yeah, you got Kinsley on your team, right? Is he
Yeah.
still in? Good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love Matt, and
totally.
it's a off podcast dialogue about how I love those guys to death.
They're so good. But
Yeah,
they came having done their homework, and these big strategics did not, right? And that's what made these guys stand out. If you've put your like blood, sweat, and tears in an agency, you don't want to sell it to somebody who's just coming in and having the swagger that they think that works. Like I want to
correct,
sell to somebody
correct.
who values what I've done, understands that it's somehow different, and is like intellectually curious about the space that we're in and what makes us different.
For us, we didn't like the strategics. They came in with a level of arrogance and kind of nose up at us that I just didn't appreciate. The PE guys were like excited, like they had a new toy and they were going to
Yeah.
shine it up and put a couple bucks in it, and that we ended up making the right call. But that was a long journey because we originally started in 2019 and then COVID hit and then we ended up going back out. But I listen, I think I watch you guys very closely. I'm very proud of you and what you're doing. I think you
Thanks,
guys are
you too.
doing a
I
fucking
appreciate that.
amazing job. I love the story. For anyone out there listening, we have all scraped our knees and elbows and chins as we've gone through these different phases of growth. And I love where you guys are at. And I love what you're trying to accomplish as an enterprise entity and what that means. Cause it's still brand new virgin territory to Shopify. Shopify really doesn't, still to this day, in my opinion, have any clue what they're about to the altitude they're about to fly into. The oxygen's very thin where they want to go, and it actually requires people like you for them to make it. It doesn't require them for people like you to make it. And I know that's bold, but that's true.
That is bold, but I definitely agree that what it means to be an enterprise platform is a thing. And the big guy in this space did that really well. It played the game in a very thoughtful and strategic way and made its partners a lot of money with, the two of you, not just the money, but just like it made everybody successful. It drove the product, it drove innovation, it drove happy brands that were just growing like gangbusters. And it did that because of a particular mental model at the very top
Yeah.
of how this ecosystem should really function. And Shopify is moving in that direction. But anybody at Shopify would tell you, it's taken us a little bit of time, but we're getting there because everybody there is Canadian and honest and everybody, but it has been a road, and it's a longer road than everybody thinks because everybody thinks things are going to be quick and easy. Not easy, but like you're in digital, so things are. But it has been a road, and you're right. Like it gets pretty funny at the altitude that they're entering and have entered in the last year.
I'm bullish on them, but I still think there's room for another entrant or two in the market. I think there can never be only one,
Oh,
but
totally.
time
It's
will.
got to be. It takes multiple horses to make a race, or whatever that
Yeah,
term is.
yeah, yeah. And
Very healthy for everybody.
we'll see what happens. I actually think it will be the best thing for the industry if we see a couple emerge. But
Yeah,
Marco, what do you want to ask Rich and I? I know
totally.
we probably should have started with questions, but dude, I appreciate all of the stories, and I actually do have a list. I know I don't do homework, but you know
Oh, man,
what
I
made
said
you
that in
jump?
email, and I was thinking about it since I sent the email being like, because I was like, "I did my homework, TJ. I don't know if, like, you're that into homework." And I when I said that, I was like, "That's a bit of a dick line."
Well, no,
But, like,
because if I don't know, you didn't listen to the podcast, but there's a podcast I talk about how I don't do homework. Like I just don't do
okay, okay,
homework.
good.
So, but I did. I had Reno and FAM, Library Sciences, Early IA, Brand Side. What made you
I
jump?
saw
How
you
was
going
it?
through it.
I got some good stuff here.
You
Look
went
at
through it.
open.
You nailed
I'm
it. Yeah.
methodic.
Now
Marco, what do you
let's
what do you
bring it
want?
over to you guys.
I got one more question though, and this is just because I'm curious. So COVID, right? And I'm imagining that you're highly remote, right?
Yeah,
Like people aren't in offices. Like I was all in
no,
office. I mean, we had remote employees, right? But they were 50 miles outside of an office. We had no, think of this, like we had no work from home, zero, unless you were
yeah.
greater than 50 miles. How do you, like president, right? Co-founder, culture? I just kind of like, gosh, I'm glad I didn't have to go through it, just to be totally frank and honest with you. Because how do you
Yeah, no,
do
totally.
culture, especially given what you said early, bringing those diverse teams together makes a project, making people talk, throwing technical, creative, making them sit in a room together. You're not in an office. It's got to be harder. I mean, it's just a curious thing for me because I would walk around and talk to people and it was easy to interact, right? And now I just think it seems harder.
Yeah, a couple easy answers. One is because we were remote first, it wasn't challenging whatsoever, and because of the age of our employees and their familiarity with remote first, they don't know the culture of a whiteboard and beers after work. In fact, it's so hard to get them out,
Yeah,
to have beers. People would rather just order Seamless and watch The Last of Us than go to drinks with the 50-year-old founder.
that makes sense. That makes sense.
I love
So,
that.
yeah, that
Yeah,
transition wasn't hard because the kids were all familiar with this weird. So, but the other question you have is, how do you foment culture in an age of distributed teams? And we don't have the answer to that. We try, but it's like if 90% of your interaction is over Slack, That's I just think you have to be friendly, throw emojis. I use Giphy more than I should to indicate that I'm a nice guy. But that's how old men try to
We're
tell
trying, right?
kids
We're
that
trying,
we're
dude.
cool. Here's a
You're
Trying.
gift.
not.
No, but I really
Listen,
like gifts, and honestly.
hold on. Let's be clear. 50 is the new 30. Let's not act like, well, Rich
I
just
just
turned
turned
60. You're 50. I'm in the middle. Go.
Yeah, questions for
We're
you.
not old.
Yeah.
We're aging youths. That is the mantra forever. Marco, what can we answer for you? I know you got a few questions there.
Yeah, you guys both I mean, it was a question from you earlier, but you both transitioned at one point out of what you were expert at into being a people manager, which nobody trained you for. And you guys have spoken about this maybe even in your very first episode, is this like need for education, like especially as you manage your teams beneath you, a great like technician, like a great engineer, you turn them into a tech architect, and then they have to be a manager of tech teams. Like that's not what they were good at. So like actually moving somebody up is inherently could put at risk the quality of the work you put out because they may have been great as a independent contributor and not as a manager. I guess so. I'm going one level above that. I'd be interested in any stories or anecdotes you have about how you managed what it meant to be in a leadership role and no longer doing what you had been historically good at, and what were some of the learnings that you would convey over to the rest of us who are, going through that transition of no longer focusing on what you had historically been great at.
Yeah, well, you go from being the best at what you do to mentoring a bunch of people that are actually better than you, right? That's probably the first stage of maturity and where you have to choke your pride down and realize that you're not on top of the thing anymore, but you have a lot of other skills that you never tapped, right? So for me, it was understanding when people had surpassed even my wildest dreams and trying to figure out how to be comfortable in my own skin around people that were better than me at things that I thought I was the best at, right? So you learn to work around that and just do the best with it and start to become a mentor. You go from being sort of the leader and the team leader to almost being like a parent. And I look at it as parenting. You're constantly mentoring the folks that are around you. You're mentoring them with such a long lens, which I don't know if a lot of our staff members ever know this. Not everybody is meant for a leadership role. Right. Some people just aren't geared. And I have folks that came in and went up through all of the ranks and are our top billing people and just were bad managers. And I think that you have to be quick to let them discover that and quick to sort of course correct it and let them fail. And also, you have to have real open conversations with people about what your vision is for them and what their vision is for themselves and whether or not there's a fit. Not all great people, just because they have tenure and intelligence, have leadership skills.
Well, that's exactly where where I was going with that. And then, Rich, I want to hear from you. Is did you ever take any training in being a manager?
I mean,
Like, because
I mean,
and I would like, I'm quite interested in knowing how I can be better. Those 360s you do, and I do read the comments, and they're kind of all fall in the same in familiar modes, but I still haven't like ever engaged somebody to be like, hey, yeah. And by the way, that's one place I think AI might be interesting for me is to record a boatload of my meetings, all my meetings over the course of a long period of time, and then tell me some honest feedback about things I do that I might not recognize.
yeah, I mean, it's different, right? I mean, I was an engineer, and so I did do that, but then I was mainly business development, right? Like I did VP of sales and marketing and did those kind of jobs, and then I took and then so I was all about sales. So my transition was from a salesman to
Mhm.
a leader, I would say, right? To your point, right? Like a people manager and a leader. Because when I was a salesperson, I wanted to be the best salesperson, beat Dave. I wanted to sell the biggest deals. Like we were competitive as hell when we started Lions, but it served us. And when we decided not to sell anymore, like on our own, like we're not going to have accounts anymore. Never. We're only going to give them to other people. Super hard, right? And I think to your point about training, like I always had a coach, I always paid a coach. I am a big believer in social emotional intelligence. And I think because I was kind of an idiot. I mean, just to be honest, right? Like I thought I should be stoic. When I was a drinker, I used to get in fights and headbutt people. Like, I mean, I just was stupid. Like I didn't know. I don't know. Maybe we all are when we're young, like good outlets for my emotions because I thought you weren't supposed to have them. So then you have kids and gosh, you learn so much from being married. I learned so much from being married and having kids, and it's almost like they taught me that feelings were okay, so then I could teach them that feelings were okay. And I had right, I was like, in teaching them, I taught myself like it's okay to feel afraid. Everyone does. Like for me to teach my little kids, like, Dad feels fear, Dad feels hurt, right? Dad feels anger, Dad feels sad, Dad feels joy, and just to kind of normalize it because it wasn't normalized for me as a kid. And I think to tie it back to business, like I did training, for all my employees just to kind of normalize, like, you can't take things personally. If a customer's website's down and they call you and they're bitching you out, you just kind of got to breathe and get it's not about you. Right. And, so we did a lot of training and I did a lot of training on myself personally to be a leader that wasn't the one that's like, I did that or that's my idea. This was, and to be able to, it's to back to what you were saying, TJ, about parenting. It was almost like to see someone repeat things and own it as theirs and use your words, but as theirs, and to go, wow, it's okay now, and not to feel like, no, that should be me. And I think, hunger, we all want affirmation. We all want, but I think it took me, like you said, TJ, I remember saying to a leadership group that I was leading, like, don't wait till you're 56 to let people know who you are. That it was kind of that long before I was starting feeling comfortable who I was and letting people know who I am. And I'm just a big baby, right? I care about a lot of things. I care about a lot of people and let people know that. And sometimes care, like you said, TJ, sometimes care is holding a vision for someone and kicking their ass because I see you doing way better than you are right now.
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of energy to repeatedly butt your head up with somebody that you know is destined for something that's different than what they're thinking about for themselves, right? And I think that's probably the hardest thing to come to terms with is, I don't know. I just got to this kid, Marco, having kids changed me. And as they aged, I changed. And I really found that raising kids is what forced me to be different and think differently and approach differently and to be a little bit more unique. And I would like to think that all of my previous leaders and staff members that had a lot of interactions with me would still speak well of me, right? 20%, like Chris Dow. I know 20% of Chris Dow would be unfavorable about me, but you
So I,
know,
I did
I
do, I
love that
mean,
you did training. I never did
no, yeah,
training,
to your
Rich. I
question, I
never
did a
went through
lot of
training.
training. Like I
Mm.
took it on to kind of break myself open, but some of that was because I got married too. And my wife, is a coach. My wife has 2 masters and she has a doctorate. So I always make a joke like she still hasn't figured me out, right? But she's trying. But I'm a better person because of it. Because of her 100% and because of being a father, since we're right off father.
One thing I look forward to is I think that there's a bit of a Gen X thing in us, right? I mean, are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Um, yeah, I think that some of what we're articulating are the kind of trials and tribulations of being our particular age. And I do wonder what the kind of leadership skills, like you say, validation, Rich. At Ralph, we had a offsite where somebody came in and talked to us about the different generations. And as the woman started speaking, I immediately thought what an idiotic premise this would be. And then she started asking questions to the audience, and, different people would raise their hands. And then she unveiled the fact that the questions were kind of about typical Gen Xer versus millennial versus Gen Y type of needs. And affirmation, and saying you're doing a good job was something that all us Gen Xers really wanted, but the millennials really didn't factor very highly in there what makes them, good at their jobs. So I do find like we are like an era of needing things that is slightly different than the people that we are managing. And so we have assumptions that the same needs that we have are what they have, but they may not need the same type of mentoring or type of affirmation. So
100%.
that's been an interesting learning.
Yeah, but Marco, I don't, it's funny. I know that everybody likes to get into this generational stuff. I just try and think back to like what was I like at 25 and 30 and 35 and 40. And I think if we got rid of the labels and just came to terms with the fact that this is a 30-year-old, that's been in the business for 5 years, and what do I have intrinsically in me that I recall when you start doing recalls of what you were like, I think you have a different perspective on how to be a leader to them. And I don't think it's
Oh,
this bucketing thing. I think it's unfair. I think it's, they say they're different, but they're not. They have different things and they grew up in a different way. But professionally speaking and personally, I believe personal connections are 50% of the business connection. There's still us. Like you're going to meet a 45-year-old that's going to remarkably remind you of where you were 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And, you know, I, I think that's what people forget. Everyone's trying to bucket everybody, but you got to it's like you coming, you got to meet people where they are and realize that, quite frankly, you're in service to them. They're not in service to you. So your job is to leave them better than you found them. And that's a
mm,
hard thing. That's a hard thing to really wrap your head around for
yeah.
some. But
I'd like to know how to measure that. I think that's like because I work with so many younger people, including my co-founding team now are younger, like they are, I think, deeply analytical, deeply interested in digging one level deeper than I was as a 35-year-old. So I'm seeing some trends of these other generations that are highly impressive. And again, because we hire, like, I mean, it's a young company, right? Like it's a young platform, young company. And I enjoy being a bit of a fish out of water in certain things because I think that the new water is pretty interesting, and how we're adopting AI and not seeing it as a threat, but as an opportunity, which is not true of everybody in our organization. Obviously, you got various developers and designers who are like, wait a second, like, am I going to cut it once this tool comes into my work stream? It's an interesting problem, but I like the way that kids are solving these problems now. I think it's slightly different than what I was seeing when I was the same age, but I was an agency side then. Uh, Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
super appreciate you, bud. Just can't thank you enough. But I watch you guys very closely in business and on the gram. So keep posting, keep
Congratulations,
renovating,
Troy. Well,
keep getting that energy out. Talk to you soon, bud.
To TJ. Thank you, Rich.
thanks.
See you.